Welcome everyone to Irreverent Faith and Current Affairs. It's me, Jamie Franklin, with Daniel French. Daniel, good to have you today. You're coming to us from Greenwich, I believe, the university thereof.
Yep, I'm on the Maritime campus. I'm in a PhD study room, so hoping we won't get disturbed. It's usually very quiet in here.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, well,
my normal chaplaincy office has been seconded by counselling today, so I don't know what that's about, but
well,
just a bit annoying.
hopefully they're using it for for good and not some kind of devious purposes. But I would say that this is at least PhD level podcast, if not a sort of post-doctoral level, really. So,
Mm.
it's perfectly reasonable that you would be in a PhD study room. I am just in my room, and there is no qualification attached to this room. Anyone can come in here. In fact, the other day I was recording a podcast with Nick Dixon. It wasn't live, but we're actually potty training my 3-year-old son at the moment, and we're at the very earliest stage where other people might use different techniques, but we use a technique where they don't have any trousers or pants on, and you just get them to get used to weeing in the potty. And anyway, my son Alex like burst in here with his with it exposed, let's say, and he just came over here and he was getting closer and closer to the camera, and Nick was in the middle of saying something. I was sort of going, no, no, with my microphone on mute, like, stay over there. We were actually talking about Jeffrey Epstein, which is kind of like gruesomely apt. And then
Oh,
yeah, and then Lorna came and like grabbed him just in time, like like he was just about to like walk off the edge of a cliff or something, like quickly. So yeah, it's fairly dramatic, but that kind of thing can happen. And there's that famous thing of that newsreader who was on the news, and then he was talking about something like
mm.
international diplomacy or something like that, and then some kid, his kid like ran in, and his wife ran after the kid and like grabbed the kid and took it out, but that was live. And the child had its trousers on, which was fortunate. Anyway, enough of that. I've got a couple of notices. The first one is please do send emails to the show. I've been trying to say this a bit more recently because it's really interesting to get people's emails, and it actually makes the show much more interesting to have stuff to read out. So email us on irreverentpod@gmail.com, irreverentpod@gmail.com. Any questions, comments, anything you want us to talk about. It's great to be able to kind of engage and interact with stuff that's going on with the audience, right? So that's the first thing. Email us. The second thing, Daniel, I actually got recognized in public today. That does not happen to me very much. But I met a lady in a bakery in Winchester. I sometimes go to this bakery I don't eat the baked goods. I just go there for tea, and I write when I'm in there. I sit in the cafe and write, and it's one of the great joys of life to sit in a cafe and write.
Mm.
Anyway, so her name's Julie
Absolutely.
Cousins, and I just want to give a big shout out to Julie Cousins. Hope you enjoyed your day in Winchester. Thank you for saying hello. Always happy to be recognised and to have a chat with the fans. Had a little selfie as well, so that was good. And then the final thing, Daniel. And I'm perfectly happy to do this if people want to email me things. But somebody emailed today to ask me to advertise a post. This is a clergy post. So if there are any clergy listening to this, or indeed if anyone knows any clergy who are looking for a job, this is for a zero point 0.6 stipendiary post for the benefit of Holy Trinity Stroud Green. So it's one church. It's a stone's throw from central London. This is going to be appointed by the Bishop of Fulham, so it'll have to be somebody who's a member of the society. And they're seeking to appoint a priest who will maintain and develop their Catholic liturgy and worship, build on the goodwill in the local community, and work with the neighbouring VC primary school. I've had a look at the advert. It looks really, really good. I'm committed here, so it's not going to be for me, but it might be for some other people who are listening to this or some friends of the show. So if anyone's looking for a job in the middle of London in an Anglo-Catholic parish, that looks really, really good. Zero point 0.6, so you might need some other income unless you can live off zero point 0.6. So anyway, I said I'd do that, and indeed I have. But that's
Which
no.
it's a funny old thing, isn't it? HR point 6 for a pay scale.
It's it's
Um,
it's a funny one, but it used to have a chaplaincy attached to it, but the chaplaincy has been removed, which is why it's gone zero point 0.6. So it's tricky, isn't it? Because unless you can afford that, you can't go there under the assumption that it's going to become a full-time post. You just can't assume such a thing in this day and age. So, it's a bit. I mean,
Some of the other dioceses are marrying those
mm,
posts with pioneer initiatives where central money has been released. There's a number in Exeter, and I've noticed elsewhere saying, half the job is this, but the other half of the job. Um, I mean, there's a cynical part of me that says, is this an accountancy game? The other half of the job is doing school chaplaincy. You think, well, you'd be doing that anyway as a
exactly.
parish priest. But they've decided to, save a full-time post by putting these two things together. So it may be, I don't know, if this post that you just said, you never know, but sometimes if there's a case for a wider, a wider mission, they might be able to get the other part forward.
Mm. Daniel, you're just breaking up a bit there. I don't know if there's anything you can do about the sounds.
No, can you hear me now? Is that
Yeah,
all
yeah,
right?
you sound okay now. You just broke up a little bit there. Yeah, no, I think that that's correct. Yeah, so it's a tricky thing. I mean, it's not too dissimilar to what I've got. I mean, obviously, I'm House of Duty and I make my money podcasting and writing and stuff, but it's a kind of similar thing. It's like if you want to have a single church nowadays and just be a parish priest for a single church, increasingly the likelihood is it's not going to be a full-time post. It's just those kind of posts are rarer and rarer today. And I only ever wanted to have a single church. I never intend. I mean, maybe the Lord might have something
Mm,
different for me in the future, but I never intend to go somewhere with more than one church because it just seems to me that,
mm,
really it's hard. I know obviously you did for many years, but it's hard to do that. And,
mm,
for me, I just want to be focused on one place. But that, like for me, I have no stipend, zero point 0.6 for this person, whoever it
mm.
might be. Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? And it is, as you say,
Yeah,
Daniel.
there's a funny kind of sweet spot in that, my wife's a curate where the training incumbent has 10 churches.
Yeah, I mean that's ridiculous. It's just
But because his ministry is more, in a sense, quasi-episcopal, so each church has a local kind of ministry person,
yeah,
whether lay or ordained. But actually, the harder one is to do a parish with four churches, because each church then really does feel they want you each full time, and it's much more difficult to say, look, actually, that's unreasonable.
yeah, it's that's a hard one, isn't it? That's a hard one. Well, anyway, Daniel, we should move on and do our Bible reading. Today, we're going to be talking about stuff going on in the country. It's also the mainly Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, probably not surviving for very much longer. And then it's also the Church of England's General Synod, Daniel. So there's all sorts of interesting things going on at General Synod. I'll have a little window into that. But first, let's have our Bible reading. So, we're actually going to take a recommendation from a subscriber to the show, one of our supporters, Tom, who's actually asked a question. It's not Tom, actually, is it? It's somebody else. Sorry. What was his name? The person who did it? Yeah, Rick. Rick. Tom's got a comment later on. Rick, who wants us to talk about Matthew chapter 16, verses 24 and 25. Also, it's quite a good reading because we're about to enter the season of Lent, which starts a week today. So we're recording on Wednesday. It'll come out for the general audience on Friday, but Lent starts in a week today on Ash Wednesday. So it's quite a good one in some ways. And Matthew 16, 24 to 25. So we'll say the Lord's Prayer and then we will read this and make some commentary. So let us pray. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So Rick's passage that he's recommended for us goes like this. Then Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. That's the NIV translation. I have to say, I find that translation really clunky. So I'm just going to read it in the ESV as well, just so people can hear a slightly more literal rendering. Then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for mine will find it. Or sorry, for my sake will find it, I should say. And Rick says, I was reading Matthew 16, and Jesus says to his disciples that they must take up their cross. This has a very significant meaning to us in the AD age, with images of Jesus carrying the cross. But at the time, what meaning would it have had? So, Daniel, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that or in the passage in general.
Um, I'd heard somewhere that it was actually a form of insult, like a sort of Greek. There was a Greek swear word around, crucifixion, so that someone might say, "Go get yourself crucified," and that
Right.
it was as rude as Ethel, and that uh, and, and so the invitation here in Matthew 24 to take up your cross and follow is very subversive. Um, it goes against the grain of the culture. I mean, we talk about it all the time, don't we? Oh, I've got a real cross to bear, or during Lent, I'm going to have to look at my cross. Uh, and and yet, in those first few centuries, we know that that was a really difficult concept because this was very much to the fore. This is how Romans displayed their authority.
Mm.
That what welcomed you as you came into maybe a new town was the criminals and runaway slaves crucified on the streets as a way to show you this is the truths about Roman peace. This is the cost and price of it. So uh, this passage is really prickly, isn't it?
Mm.
It's one that would have been incredibly shocking to hear because it invites us to something that would be deeply humiliating.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Rick makes a good point as well, is that like we've grown so accustomed to this being associated with various theological notions like the atonement and so on and so forth, that it's not easy for us to enter into the world in which Jesus was speaking in that sense, because, for the disciples, just hearing this fresh, for the first time, or maybe hearing it two or three times, they were just hearing Jesus say, we're going to be crucified by the Romans. We're going to be. You want to follow me. You need to, actually be nailed to a cross by the Romans, which was very counter to many people's expectations of the Messiah at the time. Obviously, like expectation the Messiah would be kind of somebody who would overthrow the Romans, not be crucified by the Romans. So there's that. And then what you would be thinking,
Well,
what would you be
well,
doing? Sorry.
Greco-Roman culture as well, put the heroic at the fore, isn't it? The heroic, the manly, the individual who had gained much was clearly being blessed by the gods.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, to in a sense, give that all up, to be prepared to lose it, to invert what would have been seen as Roman sensibilities of what is success, what makes Rome great, would have been, I think, quite outrageous.
Yeah.
Where the victim is the victor and the loser is the winner. Those are incredibly uh, countercultural claims
Mm.
that would have been seen, I think, probably with disgust. The way you got yourself. I mean, this obviously go into the whole Epstein thing in a minute, but the, trying to get yourself into the inner ring, the inner sanctum of the powerful, through benefactors, which again Christ alludes to, doesn't he, later? There is parts in the Gospels, but you're not to behave like the Gentiles who lord it over others, work
Yeah.
their way up the system through through patronage and sponsorship, and uh, this is a complete inversion of that.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. So it's like a giving away of everything, like worldly status, power, influence as it's understood. Um, yeah, so and it would have been incredibly confusing for the disciples. I mean, I think, I've watched all of the Chosen, which, I do think it's not perfect, but one of the things that comes across quite well, I think, is like the confusion that the disciples must have felt a lot of the time, and understandably so, when Jesus said certain things, and this would certainly have been one of them, because it would have been completely contrary, not just their expectations, as you say, but like to the expectations of everybody, of all humanity and of all the kind of empires and that had surrounded Israel for so many hundreds of years. And, it's all about power, strength, might, money, resources. And then Jesus comes along and says, the way is to be crucified, be crucified by the opposing power, be crucified by your oppressors, and you are to follow me and to do the same thing. Um, yeah, it's an
I think
extraordinary.
there's a thing that's played out, isn't there? The whole idea of Nicodemus in the series of the Chosen. To become a disciple of Nicodemus is clearly a prestigious thing.
Mm,
And maybe one day, if I stick with this guy, I'll end up, in the Sanhedrin.
yeah.
Uh, and then a rabbi would choose carefully his disciples with a view that they were going to socially ascend alongside him. Uh, and so this was a good trajectory for a
Mm,
follower of Nicodemus, but whereas the Gospels invert that to join the Messiah is to lose.
mm, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Also, it makes me think about eschatology because I know this is slightly tangential. It just jogs my mind you saying that. But this is the main reason I don't really buy into the kind of post-millennial eschatological picture, which is basically, just to put it really simply, it's like the idea that preceding the end of history, the church will be really successful and it will essentially kind of take over the whole world. Um, and usher in a kind of global Christendom. It's held by prominent evangelicals like Doug Wilson, for example. And this is the main reason I don't believe it, is because it runs so counter to this ethos that Jesus elaborates. And it's like it's not just some to me it's not just some sort of tangential thing, like he said once, oh, this is what you have to do in order to follow me. And it's like it's at the heart of everything, isn't it? Like death and rebirth. And so it seems to me to be really strange to say, well, that would be true for like all Christians everywhere at all times, but that actually the church is going to be on a different trajectory where the church becomes actually like super successful and basically everyone will become a Christian with a few exceptions, and the church will actually take over the whole world. Just doesn't seem to me to like ring true. To me, the
Yeah,
logic.
exactly. And when you look at like the works of Ratzinger, who prophesized a smaller, leaner, more underground church in the West. And, I
Yeah.
mean, Rene Girard says this as well, doesn't he? So the church is going to be stripped through the catacomb process. It's brought to that point where it loses all its prestige and is an unattractive, in worldly terms, becomes an intensely unattractive proposition to join in the sort of Huxleyan Brave New World.
Mm. Yeah. No, I agree with that.
Which brings us to when you look at the 25, for whoever would save his life. Again, soteriology, as we call it, is quite interesting there, isn't it? Because it's not only around the whole business of your eternal destiny, but it's about the destiny here and now and where you are as a person in relation to the kingdom of God.
Mm.
Um, there's a depth to that. Because I wonder as well for the Greco-Romans, I doubt they would have much soteriological baggage, and they wouldn't be they would think that after death, essentially one or two of the rich and the famous would go with the gods, but the rest would go to a sort of underworld.
Mm.
But here the Christians are actually pitching for something completely different.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. Very true. Yeah. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah, so saving there would be I think it would maybe be the Greek word sozo, which means to save or heal. I don't actually have my Greek New Testament in front of me. But yeah, it's interesting. There's that paradox, isn't there? It's like saving and finding. If you try and save your life, you'll lose it. But if you lose your life, you'll find. If you lose your life for me, you'll find it. I mean, it's the heart of Christian
Yeah,
discipleship, isn't it? And it's one of the things
and
actually.
take
What's that?
I
Sorry.
say take note, Andrew Mountbatten. Take note, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor.
Yeah. Yeah, and you could say for many people, which may be a good segue actually into the news this week. So we're going to talk we're going to talk about what's going on in the world. So the big kind of, and we'll talk about General Synod in a minute, but like the big event really that's going on in the country, in Britain at the moment, is that Keir Starmer is our Prime Minister is really on the brink because. Well, for various reasons, but the sort of presenting crisis is, of course, the situation with Peter Mandelson, who Starmer appointed to be the ambassador to America, even though he had all these links with Jeffrey Epstein, famous paedophile with all these wealthy connections, and Starmer appointed Mandelson anyway. Turns out it's actually a lot worse than anyone realised, and that Mandelson has, leaked private government documents, classified government documents to Epstein while he was in government, and so on and so forth. And basically, I mean, we're recording this on Wednesday afternoon. Starmer's not gone yet, but it does sort of seem like he's in a lot of trouble. He got hammered at PMQs this morning, apparently, although I didn't see it. Kemi Badenoch, leader of the opposition, accused the Starmer of stuffing the government with paedophile apologists. And Ed Davies attacked Starmer, and apparently there's a fresh revolt now brewing against him in the cabinet. So that's all the stuff that's kind of going on there. There's been some sort of interesting comments by Rowan Williams about this, which we can read out in a minute. But what's your sort of take on this so far, Daniel?
I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it? In terms of we are only seeing allegedly a fraction of the documents that are yet to be released, or that are, that if you stack them up, apparently it would be twice the height of the Eiffel Tower.
Really? A lot of document.
Yeah,
You need to feed
that's
that
a
into
lot
an
of
AI, I
documents.
think.
Yeah, if you recall back in the last decade, when the Telegraph looked at the MP scandals of the expenses, they had to employ, a dozen or so research students to go through boxes and boxes of receipts, and
Mm.
it took several months. Uh, this is in volume far exceeding this. So the sheer scale of it, in a sort of morbid way, is fascinating. That over time, we're drip by drip, um, more and more of this salacious stuff is being put to us, the public, and we don't know if how much is being redacted, but it's enough to give us the chills. And And clearly, when we look at the irony is that you know some of the claims made in this were seen as wild conspiracy.
Mm.
Um, were seen as wild conspiracy years ago, and now it's looking more and more like some of these conspiracies are actually on the ball.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, isn't it? Because, you know, it's not just this time. It seems like every time there is one of these so-called conspiracy theories, I'm not saying all of them, but like many of them turn out to be true, more or less, and then it's all just completely kind of accepted, isn't it? So like I remember when that film Sound of Freedom came out a few years ago, that was actually blocked for several years by the system, whomever, because it was about child trafficking. Now, why would anyone want to block a film about child trafficking from being released? The only the only answer
Mm.
to that question can be because they are either child traffickers or because they're protecting people who are child traffickers. But I think like the culture is just so sort of, I don't know, it's almost like one of the things I find really interesting about this is like the way Keir Starmer is trying to defend himself. And he's trying to almost like legislate not legislate, but he's trying to sort of manage his way out of this problem. So like he thinks that like if he can show like precisely what he knew and when, and it doesn't cross a certain threshold, then that sort of makes him okay. It's such a sort of managerialist, technocratic way of thinking about responsibility and power and morality, isn't it? It's like, well, I didn't know exactly that, and it's like he actually thinks that if he can convince people of that this is going to sort of like be acceptable, but just the whole thing just it reeks, it absolutely reeks. It's morally putrid and disgusting that our prime minister should be so closely linked to a child sex trafficker and a paedophile. I mean, it's just it's hard. It's so like on the nose, isn't it? They're it's almost like they're all in on it together. That's just the way it looks. And it's yeah, I mean it's just a new low, isn't it, for our nation and for our culture. And then you see Starmer's probably going to go. Who's going to be replaced by? Wes Streeting is probably the best of the bunch. I mean, I don't agree with him about lots of stuff politically, but he's not as bad as some of them, probably. But him or Angela Rayner or maybe someone else eventually like Andy Burnham or someone like that. So it's pretty depressing in that respect. Should we read these comments by Archbishop Canterbury, former Archbishop Canterbury, Rowan Williams? He said to the Church Times, "What is most profoundly disturbing about the whole Epstein saga is the moral hypnosis created by extreme wealth, the fascination of power, not full-blooded coercive violence, but a kind of lazy emancipation from all routine constraints, draws the eyes away from the dehumanizing processes that sustain it." This is like reading one of his books, isn't it? So I'm trying to work out what's being said here. And the ease with which persons as much as things come to look like just another luxury accessory to be bought or simply grabbed and handed around. When we have stopped weaponizing the Epstein files to use for this or that political agenda, I hope to God we start asking about how we snap out of the hypnotic trance that allows billionaires to buy people and communities, beasts and sheep and horses and chariot and slaves and souls of men. Quoting from Revelation chapter 18 there. So that's kind of an interesting comment, isn't it?
I wondered, yeah, I find I'm unsettled a bit by some of what he is highlighting here, in that the danger is to kind of over politicize and under spiritualize,
Mm, yeah.
and don't imitize the eschaton, or don't imitize the sin here, uh, and one of the things that happened very quickly after the communist revolution in Russia was that whereas before prestige was around money, now it was around power and position
Mm.
in a different way. It came into the same problem came into a different guise, and and also, philanthropists have been part and parcel of Christian culture in a good way.
Mm.
And I just felt in his essay, he was sort of poo-pooing this. If you think of the enormous amount of philanthropy in the 19th century that existed, much of it making up for the things that the state didn't or couldn't do. Many of the great institutions owe enormous amounts to moneyed individuals, who gave incredibly generously. Now, what we saw in the news is an inversion of that.
Mm.
But I just felt he was trying to criticize the economic system, uh, because that's where he's coming from politically, and actually, really, again, again, so much social gospel progressivist theology is not wanting to actually look at the problem, which is deep down within each of us. There is something that can be easily twisted. I'm reminded here, I've got it on my laptop, the inner ring quote from C.S. Lewis. But the desire which draws us into the inner rings is another matter. A thing may be morally neutral, and yet the desire for that thing may be dangerous. What of our longing to enter them, our anguish when we are excluded, and the pleasure we feel for getting into it? It's that what we saw as well in the Mandelson thing was this. He was completely hypnotized, not only by the money, but by the inner ring. That prestige of being at the top. And I mean, it plays out, doesn't it, in the Hideous Strength novel that Mark Studdock, isn't it, is completely hoodwinked initially, and just they're playing psychological games with him to make him feel important, that he's at the he's in the control room with all the levers of power. That's a very deep desire, and I think you can have it in a communist society as much as, if not more so,
Mm.
in a capitalist society.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think that's right. And yeah, I mean, he's basically saying that if we could sort of deal with this problem of having people with extreme wealth, then these kind of issues would be ameliorated. But as you say, it's not
Doubt it.
necessarily, yeah, I doubt it as well. And I also
Yeah.
think it's a slightly strange thing to say at the beginning when he says, what is most profoundly disturbing about the whole Epstein saga is the moral hypnosis created by extreme wealth. I think what's most profoundly disturbing about it is that you've got, the elite of the world, that all of whom are associated with, apparently or ostensibly civilized, democratic, Western liberal nations who are involved in this child trafficking paedophile ring. That's what's most disturbing about it, is the paedophilia and the sex trafficking. It's not the extreme wealth, It's just it's a strange, and the fact that it's the fact that there's all these people who are doing it. Who knows what else is going to come out, or what's being redacted currently. Who knows who else has been involved in this? I mean, a number of people have been saying, and to a certain extent, I think I'm obviously not about to be an apologist for Peter Mandelson, but many people have been saying that Mandelson is one of the only few people to actually have got in trouble as a result of what's going on. Where are all the other names? Where are the American politicians who are implicated in this? Where are the people from other nations? So far, we don't know. This is what's so disturbing about it, is that all of these people are in it together. All of these elites are in it together. And as you say, Dana, it's not necessarily got anything to do with wealth per se. It's because of their moral corruption. because of their moral nihilism that they do these kind of things. And who else, and who knows what they've been doing as well. We've got no idea like what's behind this, like where these people are, is it some kind of, is it like some kind of secret organization, some kind of fraternity? Are they, is there something more diabolical behind it? I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but, what
And
are these people?
how have the how's history played out recently on the back of this? How much of, say, the lockdowns um, were, the way they were through these sort of quasi-Masonic type of connections?
Yeah.
Were decisions made because there was behind it, there was blackmail and whatnot.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, indeed. We don't know, do we? But it did seem awfully coordinated at the time. And but this is one of these things, we were told we were being conspiracy theorists with many of these things, and they turn out to be true. And one just doesn't know what to think really. So it's very, very dark what's going on in our world. Yeah, it's interesting as well, isn't it, with Williams? You would expect somebody who's, you know, former Archbishop of Canterbury to say something about the problem being that these people need Christ and, something maybe like that. I don't know exactly the way he put that, but rather than saying, well, the problem is that there's too many rich people, and that these rich people, it's their wealth that is the main problem. So it's an interesting one. Shall we talk a bit about General Synod, Daniel? Um, is that something you'd like to do? I'm sure it is. Okay, so we've got a couple of things. So I don't know what we'd like to talk about first. I mean, we've got the new Archbishop of Canterbury's first address to Synod. We've also got there's been an attack on Project Spire, the slavery reparation thing at General Synod, and there's also been more controversy over the so-called living in love and faith process, which is about the gay relationships question. So, which one do you want to go for first, Daniel?
Let's go for the first one you mentioned.
Okay, so Archbishop of Canterbury, COE, has too often failed to take seriously the abuse of power, says the new Archbishop of Canterbury, Sarah Mullally, who's now been confirmed. So the way this is like basically she's sort of de facto the Archbishop, but she hasn't been. What's she going to be? It's not consecrated, is it? It's something else, but she hasn't
Installed, I think.
installed. It's like
Yeah.
software or something like that. She's going to be installed. She's going to be downloaded
It's been downloaded, it has been installed.
into the post.
Yeah.
So she recalled the charge during her confirmation of election service last month to be an evangelist, a pastor, a prayerful, penitent, resilient disciple, and a teacher. She must also, she said, be faithful, prophetic, a sign of unity, trust, and accountability. I've noticed that the new Archbishop of Canterbury, she likes to do this kind of have long lists of things that in her speaking. Well, I will try, Archbishop Mullally said to ripples of laughter. Her archbiscopate would be marked by a call to serve others, which she said has been her first calling. My Christian vocation first led me to be a nurse, then later a priest, then a bishop, and now an archbishop. And she said that theme's been running through all the chapters of her life, washing feet and serving and caring for others. Now, this is an interesting comment here. This was actually tweeted out by Marcus Walker, who's a priest in is it Little St Bartholomew's or Great St Bartholomew's? I can't remember which one, in London. Anyway, he highlighted this. Archbishop Mullally believed that her time as Archbishop would not be to develop, quote, develop new programs and initiatives, but simply to be a shepherd who worked in partnership with others. And so she said, I will work with you, Synod, my fellow bishops, and with our national body, striving to ensure that the kingdom is being nurtured everywhere, in parishes, chaplaincies, cathedrals, and schools. So that's interesting, isn't it, that she said that? What do you make of that, Daniel? Do you think that's kind of like a sop to the save the parish type people that she said that? We're going to talk about Project Spire because she hasn't
Clearly.
announced. Go on.
Clearly, clearly, and I think the era, hopefully, of Welbyism and the kind of corporate growth of the Church of England and the expansion of the blob hopefully is going to be reined in, um, because it has been found to be proven wanting.
Mm.
And it seemed to come with his ministry that there was just a whole swathe of initiatives, including an initiative to cut back, which became an initiative, that generated its own blob, which is very much like how bad institutions can operate, isn't it? We need a huge committee to cut back, and that committee in the end ends up adding to the size of the Church of England. And so the whole thing of reform and renew, I don't think that really ever went anywhere in any kind of radical cost-cutting way. It wasn't like the Doge going in and getting rid of this and that institution and that quango within the church. I mean, it just struck me within a year or two of him coming in that we were being given all these initiatives, projects, downloads, and that there was an official C of E Lent thing, an official C of E at Christmas, or not. There was, and so on and so on. Huge amounts of money being put out for stuff that no one was really asking for, as if we were essentially a franchise. Rather than a community of independent congregations, and all of this increasing the size of the blob. I think by the end of his tenure, you've got about 6,500 people working in the institution who are not ordained, compared to maybe 50, 60 years ago where you had 500.
Yeah.
You can see that within lots of institutions, including universities, that the amount of people running the show is just burgeoning over time.
Yeah, there's not a huge amount of hope that that's going to change, is there, with Sarah Mullally? But Marcus Walker, I'll read this tweet out. He wrote, it's the first president, he's actually there at Synod. He wrote, it's the first presidential address of Archbishop Sarah, and it's really parochial in the best sense of the word. She has pledged to lead, quote, not by developing new programs and initiatives, but by being a shepherd. She has promised to prioritise the local. She has, and this may sound small, but it landed very well, said thank you to those who keep our churches going. Which sounds good, but my sort of comment on that is that she has also, not in this general synod, but she's also thrown her support, and she's reiterated her support for, she's thrown her support behind and reiterated her support for Project Spire, which I think I spoke about last week with Tom, which is an attempt anyway. It's not even clear whether it's legal, whether they'll obtain permission for it yet, but it's an attempt to channel £100 million of the Church Commissioner's money, which is meant to be given to help parish churches run, to slavery reparations. Now, to me, that's like the epitome of a sort of bureaucratic, centralized initiative with clear ideological overtones, which I thoroughly disagree with, that could be used on parish ministry, but isn't used on parish ministry. And it doesn't matter how many times people say, oh, it's not affecting parish churches. For a start, it is affecting parish churches because it could be used for them. But the second thing is, it's the optics. So if she says, oh, thanks to everyone who you keep our churches going, but then the central church isn't helping us in many ways. Like one of them would be the stupid thing about not being able to replace your boiler, which is just so annoying and ridiculous for so many parish churches. Another thing is the optics of something like this. These words are just hollow. These things need to be destroyed and eradicated from the earth. These initiatives. It's not enough just to not start new ones. It's that the current ones need to be just blown into the stratosphere, and somebody
Yeah, I think
gone.
the proof's in the pudding, isn't it? I mean, if there is a cutback on a lot of middle management desk jobs and special advisors, then that'll be a good sign. But as you say, we haven't really seen that in the Diocese of London, I think.
No, we haven't. I just don't think we're going
Uh,
to see that. I don't think we're going to see that.
yeah,
I don't think we're going to see
yeah.
anything like that. And I just think it's going to be she's like a continuity candidate with like the current Pope is a continuity candidate with Francis. On the surface there are differences, but basically it's the same. I'm afraid it's more of the same thing. And I think the same kind of thing is going to carry on going. I find it interesting to speculate as to why she said this, because there must be at least some degree of awareness that people are not happy about the church and the way it's moved in that kind of direction. But it's hard to see it as a kind of declaration of war on the managerialism of Justin Welby. That's it. Just it doesn't come across like that to me anyway. But we could talk about Project Spire. It might be worth just talking about that. So, the Bishop of Salisbury, who's the deputy chair of the Church Commissioners, has offered a robust defence of the plan, Project Spire, which is to set aside £100 million to address the legacy of the slave trade. Now, we've spoken about this many, many times in this episode, on this podcast, so we won't go through precisely what Project Spire is again, and it's basically about this idea that the Church of England has gained some of its wealth through links with the slave trade. Historically, it's massive. That's a massively controversial claim. Listen to my interview with Nigel Bigger for more on that from a few months ago. So I'll read some of this. During questions, member of the Synod meeting in Church House, Westminster, closely scrutinised the proposals around Project Spire, which would require the commissioners to register a new charity, then apply for permission from the Charity Commission to transfer 100 million to it. And then in the Synod, legal, financial and historical concerns were raised. I mean, even that to me, even that sounds dodgy, doesn't it? So the reason they can't just give the money to Project Spire is because it would constitute fraud legally, because you can't give money, you can't use money that's been given for a specific charitable purpose for something other than that purpose. So they're trying to set up a new charity and then get permission from the Charity Commission to transfer £100 million from it. So even that is a kind of economic sophistry. And I just don't know what you're supposed to make of things like this. Like, what are we supposed to make of things like this when it's clearly there's at least some level of moral question over whether the money could even legally be used in this way. It just, I just don't even know what we're supposed to make of this. Sorry, Daniel, I know I'm doing a bit of a rant here already, and
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just looking up on the news here that this has clearly rattled some people in Parliament. Chief of whom is Katie Lamb, Conservative member of Parliament. He seems to be leading the charge against this. That if they find this charity and bequest it with this vast sum, that Parliament could say, well, actually, we don't think you should be doing this. I mean, I don't think this government would necessarily question it, but the next government might very well prevent them from doing it.
If it's a reform government. Bishop of Salisbury, Stephen Lake, offered a robust defence of Project Spire, insisting that it was being pursued appropriately. All the money that's so far been spent on developing the plan had taken place in consultation with the regulator and after first taking legal advice. He rebutted request to publish this legal advice to the Synod. Well, I am surprised. He said, the commissioners remain committed to establishing a new charitable fund to be an agent of change focused on achieving healing, repair and justice for all. We are progressing this work in a responsible, lawful and diligent manner. Criticisms of the proposal came thick and fast. The first 16 of the written questions submitted to the Synod sessions all related to Project Spire, and all but one came from opponents of the scheme. It's quite heartening, actually. Richard Brown from Chelmsford noted the aspiration of the project's oversight group to grow the £100 million fund to more than £1 billion in total, and asked whether any other organisations had yet committed to finance the new fund. Bishop Lake said that the commissioners were in private discussions with many, both at home and abroad, but he could not announce any names yet. So the answer is no to that then. When Mr. Brown followed up by raising concerns that the commissioners might make up the £900 million shortfall with their own funds, Bishop Lake swiftly replied, "Not on my watch." Like he's I don't know, like Gary Cooper or Clint Eastwood. "Not on my watch. That's not going to happen here. There's no way that's going to happen. We won't use that 900 million in the Church Commissioners Fund for this, I can guarantee you." And then it says, other members probed at the source of Project Spire. Research commissioned by the commissioners, which concluded that its predecessor fund in the 18th century had benefited financially from investments in companies involved in slave trading. Several members asked whether the commissioners had tendered for this research or used professional historians, or indeed moral philosophers like Nigel Biggar, who held one of the most preeminent chairs of such a thing in the world in Oxford. He was not consulted at all and he's been ignored. Bishop Lake insisted that the commissioners believed that they had, quote, proven the case, and urged those who were concerned about the project to conduct their own research into what had been published online and to inform themselves. Educate yourself, man. Educate yourself about links with slavery, rather than take the lead from those with a particular view. From those with a particular view, rather than take, as though, or do you not? He doesn't have a particular
It's
view.
crazy.
He doesn't have a particular. Amazing, amazing. It must be amazing not to have a particular view about something, and yet be the lead bishop on it. And this here, I mean, this is interesting as well. I mean, gosh, it is unbelievable. The bishop continued to say that the vociferous opposition to Project Spire had weighed so heavily that the commissioners had to put support in place to protect the well-being of the staff working on the project. The public debate, which had spilled over into Parliament and the national media in recent months, and the hostility from some, had become deeply personal, he said.
Really?
I mean,
Yeah.
it's Project Snowflake, isn't it? I mean, I'm sorry, but I have to say, like, I find it pathetic. You know, I'm a priest and a pastor to people, and we have to show appropriate levels of care and support to people when they're suffering. But this kind of thing calls into it calls the whole concept of priestly care into disrepute, in my opinion, when people are so fragile and they're so frail that they can't bear any level of criticism directed towards them at all. It causes them some kind of like mental health problem or something to have their project, deeply controversial project, criticized. And what's more, it's a kind of emotional manipulation, isn't it? Because it's like saying, look, well, why can't I spend my 100 million? You shouldn't be criticizing me. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling depressed. Stop criticizing me and just let me spend my 100 million. It's like what children do, isn't it? It's like, oh, you're making me sad now because I can't do what I want. I mean, it is.
And
Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't take into account the pressure that your average parish treasurer is feeling.
Yeah. What about the PC? What about our PCCs, who can't replace their boiler because they've got, because they're banned from General Synod and they have to try and install a heat pump for 4 times the price and it's not even going to work. What about their mental health? Nobody cares about them.
Because I think what people might not understand that's happened in the last couple of generations is back in the mid 1970s, the Church of England went into this bargain with the local parishes that they handed over their essentially their keys
Yeah.
in exchange for the guarantee of a stipend for the parish priest and a pensionable package and so on. So all those assets were in essence signed over to the diocese, but then the diocese asks, well, you then as a parish need to upload the cost of stipends, and of course that figure has ballooned over just even the last 30 years to where it's cutting into figures like 120% parish income.
Yeah.
So you end up with parishes which are having to get rid of their assets to pay the parish share, which indirectly pays the parish priest, and they're financially on the margins. They're living, they're living almost on the credit cards.
Yeah.
And here you've got the Church of England able to spaff £100 million on Project Spire. That doesn't look good.
It's disgusting. It's an absolute disgrace. Like this whole thing. Like the more I encounter it, the more I find this. I find this hypocrisy and this deceit, which is at the very center of it. The deceit is at the very heart of this thing. Intellectual and moral and economic deceit. Like Nigel Biggar has absolutely exposed the intellectual deceit, which is at the heart of this whole thing. There is no intellectually robust case for it whatsoever. It makes no sense whatsoever. But then it's the use of the funds, it's the misuse of church funds, which are not given for all these purposes. And then, it carries on here. He also sought to correct other questioners who presume that the 100 million investment must by default mean cuts to the commissioner's funding for everyday ministry in the church, saying there will be no reduction for parishes because of Project Spire. But that's not the point. It's like, it's like they think they can talk to us like we're idiots. Like that's not the point. It might not be the case that you're directly cutting money that might go to dioceses and therefore to parishes or SDF funding or whatever it might be. That's not the issue. The issue is there will be £100 million in your fund, which is not there anymore and is put somewhere else. So it won't be able to be used for that purpose. And it could be used for that purpose. There's no reason why any of this money couldn't be used for the support of parish ministry. They've got a fund which is something like £11 billion. And we've got all of these financial problems in parishes across the country. And they're doing things like this. It just boggles belief. Like when I tell people this, people who don't know, like somebody new at the church or somebody who's just talking to me about my job. When they often ask about like Project Spire because they hear about it, and then they say, well, what about, can they afford to do this and things like that? And then they say, well, they've got £11 billion, and then they say, well, why don't they, I mean, to be honest with you, most of the time they say, why don't they pay your stipend? Which is, I'm not going to chip on my shoulder, but that's what they say. That's what they say. And that's the kind of thing they think, because it could be that you could use this £100 million to pay vicars or to employ vicars or to train clergy, but they're choosing to do something else with this money. And to say these things is just, I mean, I've had enough of it, Daniel. I've had enough of it.
Yeah. And if you looked at modern day slavery within the UK, well, again, the Epstein-Mandelson documents indicate some of the flavour of the awfulness of what that could look like, as well as all sorts of other, instances of it in the last 20 years of people working in sweatshops and that within our own country. I wouldn't begrudge the Church of England who said, oh, we're going to spend £100 million planting lots of new congregations that reach out in some of those really hard estates and situations, and missionaries within our own country who are going to evangelize and pioneer in those sort of communities and try and break some of those networks. I wouldn't be against that. But this isn't that. This isn't this at all.
No, it's something completely different, isn't it? We should move on because we've got a couple of emails to do at the end, and we've got one more thing to talk about, which is the living in love and faith process. Now, Tom, who's a subscriber, summarizes quite well. He says, so this is about the gay relationship stuff, to put it, concisely. Tom says, I've had the Synod proceedings on in the background today and have looked at some of the documents. Can you guys help me explain the status of what has happened with the LLF motion? It seems bizarre to me. Synod seem to be saying, 1, the LLF process is over. Final decision. Standalone services won't happen. Clergy same-sex marriage won't happen. 2, we're terribly sorry about this. 3, but we're setting up a new working group with a different name to explore doing the things we've just decided not to do. It seems totally schizophrenic. I can't help you there, Tom.
Yes, exactly. I think that he's hit the target, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, what a monumental waste of time and energy.
Yeah.
Whatever side you're on this, you know, how from early on that the aspirations that were being pushed could not be identified as unlawful in canon. I mean, I'm astonished that someone didn't know that from the start. This was not going to be a run. And really, I think one of the problems that the C of E has tiptoed around is it doesn't actually have a theology of human sexuality. You know, if you look at, say, for instance, the writings of John Paul II in his idea of the body, there's the beginnings of a really deep understanding of the human person, the body, well, relationships and whatnot, and his relationships to God and his kingdom and our eternal life and all this. And we've not really done that. We've been very polite and just talked about relationships, and we've used secular language rather than theological language, and I think that's partly one of the reasons why we've got to the place where we've got to, where we've come to this impasse. And I think the idea that I mean, clearly this government isn't going to intervene, and I suspect the next government will never intervene.
Yeah,
because I think there would have been some who just said, "Oh, could the government have intervened on this and imposed a solution?" But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing in my opinion. I don't think the government should be getting involved in these sorts of things. There are a couple of extraordinary exchanges at the end of the Church Times article about this. So listen to this. Busola Sodiende from London acknowledged the positives raised in the presentation. This is to the Archbishop of York, and asked the Archbishop of York, at what point would the bishops provide the pastoral difference in terms of having a separate space and differentiation in how we live out the expression of this theology? Archbishop Cottrell responded, pastoral provision is proportionate to the change that is or isn't made, and that continues to be the principle. Though, of course, what is proportionate is itself contested, but that is how we're working. I don't understand what that means, any of it. I mean, I think I just about understand the question, which is, I think it's pushing towards like having different bishops for different viewpoints on this, but pastoral provision is proportionate to the change that is or isn't made. And that continues to be the principle. Don't know what that means. Then Vicky Brett from Peterborough asked, what threshold of evidence would trigger a safeguarding action? And who would be accountable when a young person was harmed emotionally, psychologically, or spiritually by church processes? In other words, because the liberal position hasn't been reached on this question, people have become so upset that it now constitutes a safeguarding offence. As if you needed more evidence that safeguarding has become a Trojan horse in the church, by the way. Archbishop Cottrell said that this was a, quote, deeply serious question to which I don't want to give a short, inadequate answer. He continued, I know the reality of the situations you're describing because I've had conversations with people for whom that has been their lived reality. I'm sure all of us would want to do all that we can to minister to and prevent that happening. but I feel as if that needs a conversation. I hope you will keep bearing witness to that bit of the story. A motion on NLF is due to be debated by the Synod on Thursday afternoon. Any comments on any of that, Daniel?
Well, I was minded of Bernard Randall
Mm.
in terms of the safeguarding thing, where safeguarding's gone off the rails and become a law unto itself.
Yes, where he was said to be
Uh,
the safeguarding risk when he was in fact the one who was basically fired from his job and barred from operating as a minister in the Church of England for preaching a sermon in which he merely said that people can make up their own minds about the LGBTQ plus etc. issue. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but just to say that's what.
no, that's it, spot on. And, but even then, I think that this whole culture of the overemphasis on risk management, safeguarding, and whatnot, I think some of that overreach is probably coming to its half-life.
Mm.
And again, I suspect that a new government may, across the board, when it comes to institutions, give a different kind of instruction that sort of defangs some of this.
What do you mean by that?
That the, the sort of safeguarding bodies doing to what they've done to Bernard Randall would, by edict, just not be allowed.
Right.
But that you could essentially unlicense someone because they had a religious view that didn't agree with the institution's values.
Yeah, I mean,
Because that's a lot of people are in their jobs. This is where you can get rid of an institution, can essentially cancel somebody because they can say, oh well, though we claim the right to free speech because so and so doesn't align with our values, we consider them to be a safeguarding risk.
Mm. With Bernard Randall, it was even more Kafkaesque than that because what he said, I mean, he didn't even really say anything. He just said you can make up your own mind about this. But he actually quoted, I can't remember specifically which sources, but he quoted from Anglican sources. So what he actually said was completely congruent, certainly didn't contradict any Anglican formularies or any official doctrine or teaching or anything like that. So it wasn't even that. It wasn't even that he said something, and even in some of the reports, there were sort of implications that it was actually the Anglican doctrine itself that was the safeguarding risk. I mean, it's so absurd. It's so crazy. It's Kafkaesque. It really is. And this question, to me, that is exactly the problem. Well, it's one of the problems with what safeguarding has become. It's no longer about, well, I mean, it may still in some context, but it's no longer only about protecting children who may be abused or are being abused or vulnerable adults. It's something which is being weaponized by people for political purposes in order to push through their ideological agenda. That's got nothing to do with somebody who's actually being abused. That's Vicky Brett is talking about people who are upset that their theological agenda has not been pushed through synod. That's a completely different thing. That's a categorically different thing to like a child that's being sexually abused. And to imply that it's not, to imply they're somehow in the same category, is to not take seriously enough what safeguarding is supposed to be about in the first place, which is actually safeguarding people who are being abused, children and other people. So yeah, it's
No, I mean, consider, for instance, if one questioned the whole notion of two spirits.
yeah.
Yeah, and you said, oh, I've got a theological problem with that.
Well, you may be a
Um,
safeguarding risk.
that it comes from Native American creation, spirituality, that it sounds a bit weird and potentially it's unbiblical. The Bible is not very hot on two spirits, people having two spirits, whatever that means. That you could see how an institution could then pull that person in
Mm,
and to do all sorts of things.
mm,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and I just think the next government has to just mow all this down. Just has to pull the plug on it.
well,
And whether there is some super piece of legislation that can do that, I don't know. But a sort of a repeal act that just makes all of this impossible.
yeah, I think it's very unlikely that something like that will happen personally, but yeah, maybe. Daniel, we have to finish soon, so I'm just going to do a plug. Then we're going to read an email, and then we'll, if you could do a prayer at the end, that'd be good. So just to say, thank you very much for listening, everyone. If you enjoy this podcast, please do consider supporting the podcast. You can do that for as little as £2.50 plus VAT in the UK per month, as we've been hearing. I'm not paid by the church, so I live off my podcasting and writing. Plus, we have to pay for the show. It costs money to make it, and so on and so forth. So, really do appreciate when people support us. It's not just, straightforward charity. It's also the fact that you get something as well from it, which is you get our extra podcast episodes uncollared. You also get my monthly chats with Nick Dixon. I've just done one of those epic chats with Nick. The episodes come out early for subscribers as well, and we take your questions and do other things. So you do get lots of stuff. So please go to patreon.com/irreverend and support us there, or support us on Substack if you prefer, irreverendpod.substack.com. All of that's on our website, reverendpod.com, and all the links are under the show notes or in the YouTube video notes. So please do support us if you possibly can. Really appreciate it. Make today the day. So I'm going to read two emails. I'm not going to read the one from Bishop Greg because it's actually about something Tom said. So I'll save that for when Tom's on the show. One came from Tim. Subject line: "You two are not old." Speaking to me and Tom, and said, "Daniel and I are old-ish." Can you believe that, Daniel? I don't think you're old. I think that's rude. He said, "Can you recommend a good talking book version of the Bible, please? Everything I've tried seems to be a terrible AI generated voice." I don't listen to talking books, to be honest with you. Do you listen to talking?
Um, no, but the Poirot actor, what's his name,
Oh,
David
great.
Suchet,
Oh, James
has
David.
I believe he has done, if not
Yeah,
all of the New Testament, parts of it, hasn't he?
I
And I
think
think
he's done.
he has a very, you know, a good voice, very attractive listening voice.
I think he's done
Um,
the NIV. I have a feeling he's done the whole thing. So you
mm,
get that. There's like a cast of you get like there's one with like a cast of all black actors I saw. I'm not suggesting that's I'm just saying that that's like the kind of thing. There are all sorts of things which you can get
mm,
if you go on Audible. There are loads of
yeah.
um
Here you are. I've just found it. Yes, definitely. Yeah. The NIV read by Suchet, the
mhm,
complete Bible.
yeah,
That's impressive, isn't it? So that is available to
available
purchase.
now. Yeah, David Suchet, go for that. All right,
Mm.
now the substantive email that we have, I'm going to cut this down. So this is from Gavin. And he says some nice things about last podcast. Thank you very much, Gavin. And then he mentions coming to Daniel's event in Greenwich with it's John McGinn who was there, wasn't it, Daniel?
Mm.
So this is his comment here. So he said it was a blessed time of fellowship in Greenwich. Daniel has a lovely, capable team of young people around him, and the evensong and filming were of a high quality. A talk from John McGinley. I said John McGinn, didn't I? John McGinley formed the largest section of the meeting. He's heavily involved in mainstream Anglican church planting and was promoting Awaken, a book about the quiet revival in the UK since 2020. The big fact, and the highly encouraging one, is that UK Bible sales doubled from 200,000 in 2019 to 400,000 in 2026. Extraordinary. No one would have predicted anything like it back in 2019. But in common with Justin Brierley and Glenn Scrivener, John's explanations lack the power to explain the huge leap. You can't write accurate history under a regime of censorship, and sadly, those whose view was obscured by censorship in 2020 to 2022 still seem unable or unwilling to see the more complete picture. It required something powerful to dramatically reverse the decline in Bible sales. The best explanation is the totalitarian, fascistic nature of the lockdowns and jab coercion, which awakened people to the chilling reality of evil and in turn led them to seek an explanation in God and his word. Like Glenn and Justin, John appears to have little or no idea that hundreds of thousands marched on the streets of London and showed a level of openness to the gospel of Jesus Christ seldom seen in living memory. Similarly, John, Glenn, and Justin seem unaware of how the Holy Spirit used Ephesians 6:10-20 so powerfully at the time. Never have I heard so many people talking about the principalities and powers and the whole armor of God. Gavin says he tried to alert John to this fact that by rolling over to the state, the church wasted a great opportunity, and asked what he would do to respond more faithfully in future. He seemed to have learned something and came across as a sincere, devout Christian, but Gavin says, I was taken aback that someone could go to the extent of writing a book on an event and be largely ignorant of the main cause of said event. The failure of the church seems to go some way to explaining why the big increase in Bible sales has not led to a similar sized and undeniable increase in church attendance. He says, none of this applies to us. You showed great courage in starting a podcast, speaking out, and being a big influence along with William Phillip and others. Behind the letter by Clergy in autumn 2020 to advise against a second lockdown of churches. John's aim of taking the gospel of Jesus Christ to areas of the UK which have not been reached is clearly the Lord's work. I pray that more Christian leaders would learn what has really been happening in the UK from 2020 onwards, because that would significantly heighten their spiritual effectiveness. And then some nice things at the end as well. And then he says, a proper Jekyll and Hyde season from Spurs again in his PS. My team Fulham are ticking along nicely, but there's a long way to go yet. Our manager, Thomas Frank, has just been fired, I've just found out. So yes, it is indeed. Daniel, what's your comment on any of this?
Lord Frost did mention this actually, in a way that John McGinley didn't, and he spoke about how he was moved towards faith by a sense of impending darkness. So he kind of connected with some of the things that have been said here. Yeah, I kind of get what's being said. I suppose a lot of Anglican evangelicalism, I think, has existed in its own micro bubble. It's very often very suburban. It is, like a lot of HTB, it's very sort of middle class or upper middle class. And so I think individuals in that world won't necessarily see what we might have seen in a different ground, different terrain. I think he's not unsympathetic to it, but hasn't really kind of necessarily developed that view. I think when I went to the Speak Live conference with Justin Briley and Glenn Scrivener, I did feel that, that there's still more processing to be done there on this question. I mean, I call it sort of dark numinous that sort of came out of the 2020s. That is, part of a valid religious experience. We can look at the Quiet Revival purely from an anthropological, sociological view. It's because of this and that. It's because of these factors. It's because of the demise of new atheism, rather than actually see it as a work of the Spirit. That it may be God encouraging His people in difficult times to raise up new shepherds, and I think that's been one of the problems with the interpretation of the Quiet Revival, is that we've immanentized it. So we immanentize the eschaton. We've become so. We lack so much fluency in the supernatural in this sense. But I would say, speaking to John privately, I would think that he was largely sympathetic with this, but doesn't hasn't necessarily spoken to this constituency in the same way that you and I have. So we've come used to kind of picking up on some of the language and
Mm. I wonder
it's,
as I wonder with the lockdown stuff whether there's a kind of squeamishness over confronting the political reality that's related to the spiritual reality, let's say. So, yeah, I can't really comment on any of these people really because I don't really know them well enough to say this, but I think you have to be open to that, that there is some link between the political and the spiritual reality here. You and maybe another way of saying that might be that there might be a certain squeamishness um around linking, anti-lockdown sentiment with this revival. There's, to put it bluntly, that's that sort of idea is kind of pretty unpalatable to the kind of progressive liberal mindset. So I think that maybe
or that some people within mainstream evangelicalism would just that would be outside their terrain.
yeah,
Because if you think in the lockdown in terms of if you're running if you're in the leadership team of say a big HTB plant, you probably thought initially, well, this is an opportunity for us to up our digital
yeah,
game.
yeah,
And I think what a number of these churches found that that was okay in the first couple of months, but actually sort of 9 months in, we're actually really struggling to hold people, and when we're not able to pay the bills and the diocesan super share that we have to, and I knew of clergy in those situations who pretty much had a nervous breakdown because suddenly there's no stage, there's no light, there's no theatre, there's no band.
mm,
Yeah. Whereas you and I have, we can celebrate the mysteries of the faith in all its depth with bread and wine.
mm,
And there's something deeply embodied in the Catholic tradition
mm,
and the prayer book tradition of the Church of England as well.
mm.
Uh, I think that that puts you more on the fore, puts you more on the front lines, really.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. No, I can
uh,
see that. I can see that. I mean, I wasn't
yeah,
commenting on John because I don't know John. I mean, I know from
yeah.
what I've heard that he's an evangelical. I was just saying, I think the impression I got from the Speak Live conference is that the political fla flavor was more to the left, pardon me, than say this podcast. And I think that puts the blinkers on when it comes to this potentially.
Only because certain voices, I would say, having been there, only because certain voices were given platforms
Yeah, yeah, for
to
sure.
make a very loud noise.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know you were there and you spoke, but the you know the
Uh,
the things that I heard coming out of it were along those lines. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. To be continued because we need to finish. Daniel, can you say a prayer for us to finish off the episode?
may God give us grace to take up our cross to follow him, knowing that he who asks this of us says his burden is light, his yoke easy. Amen.
Amen. Thanks very much, Daniel. Thanks everyone for listening, watching, and the watching. Till next time, keep watch.
Keep the faith.